Every gardener over 60 has lost plants they cared about. That sentence lands like a hand on the shoulder, and that's what we are here to settle once and for all. Let's talk about root rot. Root rot does not announce itself. It works underground, silently, while the plant above keeps performing and keeps looking almost okay, right up until the point it doesn't. And by the time most gardeners see the obvious signs, the root system is already so far gone that saving the plant is no longer a realistic conversation. Here is what nobody tells you clearly enough. Root rot shows itself above the soil line long before it destroys what's below it. There are 12 specific signs visible, identifiable, and actionable that appear in a predictable sequence before a plant reaches the point of no return. I'm going to walk you through every single one. And stay with me until sign 9, because that particular sign is the one that gets misread most consistently, and misreading it is what turns a recoverable situation into a lost plant every single time. Let's start the diagnosis. Healthy roots do two jobs. They anchor the plant and they absorb water, minerals, everything the plant above needs to function. When soil stays waterlogged for too long, the oxygen those roots need to stay alive gets squeezed out by the standing water. Roots begin to die. Dead root tissue in wet soil becomes a feeding ground for specific fungal and bacterial organisms, Phytophthora, Pythium, Fusarium, among others, that move from dead tissue into living tissue rapidly. The infection spreads. More roots die. The plant above starts receiving less and less of what it needs, not because you stopped watering, but because the very structure responsible for delivering water and nutrition is being destroyed from underneath. The plant doesn't know why it's receiving less, it just knows it is. And it responds with a sequence of visible symptoms that, if you know what you're looking at, tell you exactly what stage the root system is at and exactly how much time you have left to act. 12 signs, in order of appearance. Let's go through them one by one. Sign 1, leaves that wilt in the morning. This is the first signal the plant sends and the one that gets dismissed most often because wilting in the afternoon makes sense to most gardeners. Heat stress, sun intensity, temporary moisture demand. Afternoon wilt in summer is normal and usually recovers by morning without intervention. Morning wilt is different, completely different. In the morning, temperatures are low. The sun hasn't built any real intensity yet, and the soil has had the entire night to redistribute whatever moisture is in it. If a plant is wilting at 8 in the morning before the day has asked anything of it, that plant is telling you its root system is already struggling to deliver water, even under the easiest possible conditions. Most people see morning wilt and water immediately, which is the worst possible response if root rot is the underlying cause, because the soil is almost certainly already wet enough. And adding more water tightens the conditions the rot organisms thrive in. When you see morning wilt, check the soil moisture at 4 to 6 inches before you do anything else. If the soil at that depth is still damp, do not water. Observe the plant for 2 to 3 days. If the morning wilt continues despite consistently moist soil, root rot has entered the conversation. Sign 2, yellowing that starts from the bottom. Normal leaf yellowing has a pattern that tends to affect older leaves, outer leaves, or leaves shaded from light over time. It's slow, patchy, and usually affects one area while the rest of the plant looks healthy. Root rot yellowing has a completely different pattern, and once you know what it looks like, you will never confuse the two again. It starts from the bottom of the plant and moves upward. The lowest leaves yellow first, not one or two randomly, but the entire lowest tier, often going from pale green to full yellow within the same week. Then the next tier begins. The yellowing climbs the plant steadily from the ground up because what's happening underground is also progressing upward as the rot spreads. The second distinguishing feature, the yellowing from root rot, tends to affect the whole leaf evenly. Not patches, not edges, the entire leaf surface fades together. That even, whole leaf yellowing climbing steadily upward from the soil line is a pattern with very few other explanations. At this stage, the root system has begun to lose meaningful function, but it has not lost all function. This is a point where intervention can still change the outcome. Sign 3, Leaves that feel soft and paper thin. This sign requires you to actually touch the plant, which most gardeners don't do as part of a regular check, and which is exactly why this signal gets missed so consistently. A healthy leaf has structure. It resists your fingers slightly when you handle it. There's water pressure within the leaf tissue, keeping it firm, the same principle as a balloon that holds its shape because of what's inside it. Root rot reduces that internal water pressure as the root system's ability to deliver water consistently begins to fail. Leaves start losing their firmness. They feel thinner than they should. When you fold one gently between two fingers, it creases in a way that a well-hydrated leaf wouldn't. The surface might still look green, still look like a functioning leaf, but the texture tells a different story. Run your fingers along the leaves of any plant you're monitoring. You're feeling that slight resistance. When a leaf goes soft and papery, especially while the soil is still moist, the plant is receiving less water from its roots than it needs. Sign 4. Stems turning. Soft at the base. This is the sign where the problem becomes physical and where most gardeners who catch it here still have a fighting chance. A healthy plant stem at soil level should feel firm. Squeeze it gently between your thumb and forefinger. In a healthy plant, you feel resistance. The stem pushes back. In a plant with progressing root rot, the base of the stem begins to soften as the fungal activity that started in the roots reaches upward into the lower stem tissue. The outside might still look normal. The same color, no obvious discoloration, but the feel is wrong. Slightly spongy, slightly yielding where it should be firm. In some plants, this softening comes with a color change, pale brown, dull gray, or a darker waterlogged discoloration at or just below the soil line. In others, the texture is the only reliable indicator. Make a habit of pressing gently at the base of any plant, showing earlier signs from this list. If the stem base gives under gentle pressure, that is no longer early-stage root rot. The infection has moved above the soil line. The window for saving the plant is narrowing. If you're watching this because you have a plant showing some of these signs right now, stay until the end because the recovery section will matter to you. And if this kind of specific, practical growing content is useful to you, subscribe to Rickard Backyard Garden right now. New video every week, always at this level of detail. Buttons right below. Let's keep going. Sign 5. Sudden leaf. Drop without yellowing first. Most leaf drop follows the same sequence the leaf yellows. Sometimes browns at the edges, weakens, and eventually falls. That process takes days or weeks and gives you time to notice and investigate. Root rot can produce a different kind of leaf drop, entirely sudden, without the normal lead-up. Green leaves falling from the plant with almost no prior warning. You walk out one morning and find leaves on the ground beneath a plant that looked completely normal the day before. What's happening internally? The root system has deteriorated to the point where it can no longer support the full canopy above. The plant begins shedding leaves it can no longer sustain, reducing its own surface area to match the reduced capacity of its failing root system. This sudden drop, when it occurs alongside any of the earlier signs of soft base, bottom-up yellowing, morning wilt, confirms root rot as the cause. When it happens without those earlier signs, it still warrants immediate investigation. Pull the plant gently from the soil and examine the roots directly. At this stage, what you find below the soil line will tell you exactly how much of the root system is still viable. Sign 6. Brown tips spreading inward. Brown leaf tips are common and have multiple possible causes. Low humidity, salt buildup from fertilizer, wind damage. On their own, they don't indicate root rot. The distinguishing factor with root rot browning is the direction it moves. Standard tip browning stays at the tip. Root rot browning doesn't move steadily inward toward the center of the leaf as the root system's capacity to deliver water and nutrients continues to decline. Track it, mark a leaf you're watching, a small piece of tape on the nearby stem, or a photograph. Check it 1 week later. If the brown boundary has moved inward, something progressive is happening. Static browning that holds its position is usually environmental. Browning that's actively expanding toward the leaf center is the plant showing you its internal delivery system is getting worse, not better. Sign 7. Stunted new growth. Plants in the active growing season are visibly growing, new leaves unfurling, new shoots extending. The tip of a healthy stem changes meaningfully week to week throughout spring and summer. Root rot doesn't always stop growth immediately. What it does, earlier than most people realize, is reduce the quality and speed of new growth significantly. New leaves appear smaller than normal, noticeably smaller than the leaves lower on the same plant. New shoots extend more slowly than they should for the time of year. The growing tip looks like slightly compressed leaves packed more tightly together because each one is smaller than it should be. This stunted new growth, alongside simultaneous yellowing or wilting lower on the plant, creates a specific appearance that, once identified correctly becomes immediately recognizable. The plant is contracting, reducing demand at the top because supply from the bottom is failing to meet it. At this stage, a soil investigation is overdue. The symptoms above ground are now reflecting significant root loss below. Sign 8, the soil that won't dry. This one is about the soil rather than the plant, and it belongs on this list because it's not a symptom of root rot. It's one of the primary drivers of it, and reading it correctly tells you when conditions have become dangerous before the plant shows any visible signs at all. Healthy garden soil has a drying cycle. After watering or rain, the surface dries within a day or two in warm weather. The cycle of wet to appropriately moist to slightly dry and back again is what roots need to breathe and function. Soil that stays wet at 4 to 6 inches for more than 3 to 4 days after the last watering, in warm weather with no additional rain, has a drainage problem. Soil that feels cold and heavy and smells faintly sour, not like normal earth, but faintly fermented, has water sitting in it that isn't moving. That smell is the first physical indicator that conditions for root rot are already present. The sourness comes from anaerobic organisms beginning to break down organic material in waterlogged conditions. It precedes visible root damage. If your soil smells wrong and stays wet when it shouldn't, treat it as a warning before any plant shows symptoms, because by the time symptoms appear, those organisms have already been at work for some time. Sign 9. Recovery that doesn't hold. This is the sign I told you about at the start, the one that gets misread more consistently than anything else on this list, and the misreading of it is what turns a recoverable situation into a dead plant in most cases. Here's what it looks like. The plant wilts noticeably drooping. Stressed, you water it. Within a few hours it recovers, stands back up, looks better, seems to have responded normally. You feel reassured. 2 days later, it wilted again. You water again, it recovers again. The cycle repeats. Most gardeners read this as a watering frequency issue. The plant simply needs water more often. So they water more often, and the plant keeps wilting and recovering until one day it wilts and doesn't recover at all. What was actually happening throughout that entire cycle? The plant's damaged root system was capable of absorbing a small amount of water immediately after watering enough to temporarily restore pressure in the leaves and make the plant look recovered. But with only a fraction of its root system functioning, it exhausted that small reserve within a day or two and wilted again. Each additional watering was adding more water to soil that was already staying too wet, accelerating the rot that was causing the wilting in the first place. The signal that separates root rot, wilting from straightforward underwatering. A healthy, underwatered plant recovers and stays recovered after a thorough watering. It doesn't need another drink 2 days later unless the weather is extreme. A plant with root rot recovers briefly and wilts again on a short, predictable cycle because the fundamental problem isn't the water you're adding, it's the roots that can no longer use it properly. If you have a plant in this cycle right now, stop watering and investigate the roots immediately. Sign 10. Roots that look wrong when you dig. At some point, the investigation moves underground. Knowing what you're looking at when it does determines whether you make the right call on what happens next. Healthy roots are white to pale cream in color, firm to the touch. They resist gentle pressure and you can run your fingers along them without the outer layer sliding off. They have a faintly clean smell, like soil after rain. Roots affected by rot are brown to black. Soft, they compress between your fingers with almost no resistance. The outer sheath slides off when handled, leaving a thin wire-like inner strand behind. And they smell not like soil, but like decay, like something sitting in still water for too long. The critical assessment, what percentage is still white and firm versus brown and soft. If the majority of the root system is still pale and structurally sound, with rot affecting only a portion, typically the finest feeder roots at the tips, the plant is recoverable. If the rot has reached the main structural roots closest to the base of the stem, the plant's recovery is severely compromised, and the decision to save it versus replace it becomes a realistic conversation. Never make that decision based on the appearance of the plant above the ground. Always pull it and look. Sign 11. Fungus gnats in unusual numbers. Fungus gnats are common enough that most gardeners don't think twice about a few of them around a plant. A sudden increase in activity around a specific plant, noticeably more than the background level across the rest of the garden, is a reliable indicator that the soil around that plant has stayed wet longer than it should. The gnats aren't causing the root rot, but they're drawn to exactly the conditions that cause and accelerate it, and a cluster hovering consistently around one plant while the rest of your garden sees normal levels is the soil environment telling you something before the plant itself has shown every sign on this list. Seen alongside 2 or 3 of the earlier signs, fungus gnat clustering confirms the picture. Sign on its own, it warrants investigation. Either way, it should not be ignored. Sign 12. The plant that looks fine until it doesn't. This is the hardest sign to explain because it isn't a single visible symptom. It's a pattern of absence, the absence of any earlier signs for weeks, right up until the plant collapses. Some plants mask root rot symptoms better than others. Large, established plants with significant stored energy in their stems and remaining root structure can maintain a near-normal above-ground appearance while root rot progressively destroys the system below. Succulents do this. Established shrubs do this. Some perennials do this. The energy reserves are large enough to keep the plant looking functional, even while the system delivering new energy is failing. The collapse, when it comes, is sudden and complete. The plant goes from looking acceptable to looking beyond help within days because it has been running on reserves rather than active root function, and the reserves finally ran out. The way to catch this before it happens is not to watch the plant more carefully. It's to test the soil around it regularly, especially around any plant in a spot with a drainage history. Push a finger or a moisture meter to 4 to 6 inches every week or 10 days. If the soil is consistently wetter than it should be for the time since last watering, investigate the root zone before the plant gives you any reason to. Root rot caught by soil testing before symptoms appear is almost always recoverable. Root rot caught after sudden collapse almost never is. The difference between those two outcomes isn't luck. It's whether you were watching the soil or waiting for the plant to tell you. What to do when you find it. Finding root rot is not automatically a death sentence for the plant. What you do in the 30 minutes after you find it determines the outcome. Pull the plant from the soil immediately, gently, but completely. Shake the soil from the roots and rinse them with clean water so you can assess clearly what you're working with. Using clean, sharp scissors or pruning snips sterilized with rubbing alcohol before and after, cut away every root that is brown, soft, or slides apart when handled. Cut generously into healthy tissue rather than conservatively into damaged tissue. Every piece of rot you leave connected to the plant is a pathway for the infection to continue. If less than a quarter of the root system is still white and firm, recovery probability is low, but not zero to continue the process. Once all damaged roots are removed, dust the cut surfaces with powdered cinnamon, a natural antifungal, or treat with a diluted hydrogen peroxide solution. Allow the roots to air dry for 30 to 45 minutes. Do not rush this step. Replant into fresh, well-draining growing medium in a clean container. If replanting into the ground, addressing the drainage problem, first raise planting mounds, added perlite or coarse grit, or a completely different location. Return the plant to the same conditions that caused the problem and the rot will return. Reduce watering dramatically for the first 2 to 3 weeks. A plant with a reduced root system cannot process normal watering volumes, and wet soil remains the primary enemy. Water only when the top 2 inches of the new growing medium are dry. The plant will look worse before it looks better. Expect further leaf drop and continued wilting for the first week or 2. What you're watching for, new white root tips appearing at the cut ends, small, pale, and firm. That is the plant rebuilding. That is the sign the intervention worked. 12 signs, and every single one of them is visible above the soil line before the root system reaches the point of no recovery. Root rot is not an unavoidable disaster. It's a slow process with a long, early warning system if you know what the warnings look like and take them seriously when they appear. Morning wilt, bottom-up yellowing, soft stem bases, the recovery cycle that doesn't hold. These are not subtle. They're the plant doing everything it can to communicate what's happening underground in the only language it has. Learn to read that language. Check your plants the way a good gardener actually checks them: hands on leaves, fingers in soil, eyes at stem level, not just a glance from standing height. The difference between a plant that lives and a plant that dies from root rot is almost never about the rot itself. It's almost always about how early someone paid proper attention. Your garden is talking. This video is how you learn to listen. Subscribe to Rickard Backyard Garden every week. Practical growing knowledge explained exactly like this. No filler, no obvious advice, just the detail that actually makes a difference in your garden. See you in the next one.